I'm really excited for this one actually, because we have been coming across a lot of people who've been thinking about starting something of their own. And I mean, it's no real surprise, right, Nikhil? I'm sure you've heard about it, you've read about it, that over the last 4 or 5 years, there has been a phenomenal increase in the number of people who are thinking about starting startups. Just in terms of the actual stats, what I figured out was that I think in the last 6 years, there has been a 15,400% increase in the number of startups in India, right? That's percent. That's not just the total number of startups. I think the total number of startups is around now 73, 74,000 just in India. And it probably does not account for the startups that are not registered right now, right? So I think there is definitely a phenomenal increase in the number of startups in India. Main thing though is that people are, coming up with great ideas, but they don't always have a great plan for execution of that idea and making it a full-fledged business. So the goal of today's workshop is to, really focus on how we can help others translate their business idea into a full-fledged, successful, sustainable business. And it is great to have you on this platform today, because I know that you have started two of your own startups, Grip and Chalo. I obviously want you to talk a lot more about those two startups and your journey so far. But yeah, just to set the stage and just to set the context for everybody, Nikhil has switched careers himself from, I think, finance to starting two of his own startups, one in transport technology and the other in fintech, where he's currently the founder and CEO. So thanks again, Nikhil, for joining us. And with that, I just want to give you a chance perhaps to share a bit about your journey and background.
Sure. Once again, Arjun, thanks for having me, and thanks to everyone to take our time on Saturday morning to learn a little bit more about my journey, and happy to share whatever I can to make it helpful for whatever you're thinking in terms of starting up yourself. Just to introduce myself, I started my career after an MBA in the finance space. My first job was at HSBC. I was a management trainee looking at mortgage or home loan department, thinking about the strategy for increasing HSBC Bank's home loan share. Everything from credit to underwriting, distribution, pricing. So that was the first role that I had. My second role in about 7 months was to move to Morgan Stanley's investment banking team, where I spent close to 6 years doing advising on IPOs, capital markets, and M&A transactions. And post that, I started Chalo as my first venture. As Arjun mentioned, it was a mobility startup focused on the intra-city bus space. Incredibly proud of what the company has now achieved. I think we recently clocked 1 billion rides a year for passengers across 30 cities in India. I subsequently moved. I exited that business personally and moved to the World Bank as a public policy consultant before starting Grip as my second venture. Grip is an alternative investment platform for people like us who would like to diversify our portfolios away from stock markets and fixed deposits, but are looking to start at smaller ticket sizes. So Grip offers investments in higher yielding fixed income. So you can make 12 to 14% interest rates, but at a ticket size that starts from 10,000 rupees. At the same time, give options in commercial real estate or startup equity at ticket size of 1 or 2 lakh rupees. Yeah, so that's a little bit about me. Arjun, happy to dive into your questions and other topics that you want to cover.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a really helpful background, I think, Nikhil, because it seems like you have dabbled in different roles, right? You haven't always been a founder. You haven't always been an entrepreneur. And that is kind of the trend we are seeing, right? That it's not just people right out of college who are starting startups, even though there are plenty of those there. But Pivot is a platform that helps people transition from one role or industry to another. So the kind of people we come across are typically people who have experience in different fields already, right? Could be finance, could be marketing, HR, healthcare, whatever. And they have very kind of creative and diverse ideas, which may have nothing to do with what they are currently working on, right? And the reason I'm sharing that is because I see a similar fact pattern in your journey a little bit, right? So you started your career in investment banking, and then you moved on to M&A strategy and all of those things, which are very, very, core finance heavy topics. But then your first startup was in mobility and transportation. So obviously there is a bit of a leap of faith and a career shift that you've made yourself, not just in terms of starting your own company, but also the subject matter and the industry that you were dabbling in, right? So that is the number one question that I want to kind of explore further, based on whatever you have seen in your own journey and perhaps working with other entrepreneurs as well. Is the first thing for any startup entrepreneur or aspiring entrepreneur is the idea that they're working. Ideas are plenty, but how do you actually kind of assess the merit of that idea to see if it's actually scalable and actually helps people solve their problems? So for you, how did you figure out that Chalo would be a good idea given your relative inexperience in that field before you started?
Sure. No, I think that's a great question. And the inspiration for an idea can come from honestly from anywhere. Okay, it doesn't necessarily have to be your day job or what you're currently working or employed as. The best ideas are by founders who've had an insight into something on a day-to-day basis, which other people have not had an insight on, right? Which are people go through, but don't necessarily capture as something that is solvable on a mass scale. Chalo, for example, was about bus transportation, and buses have been around for decades, right? The first bus transportation agency was started pre-independence in India, and since then, people have had a challenge with respect to how they take buses. Chalo, as a business, was built on the insight that this problem can be solved, right? And it can be made easier. It's not that we were the first people to take a bus or the first people to see this problem, but what differentiates a founder is to say, okay, there is a way to solve this and make it better. It does not need to be necessarily something that you are working in or employed in as a sector. Obviously, it is very natural to come across something in your own sector, right? Because you see it every day. But I think inspiration can come from any corner. Your second part of the question is equally important, which is to say, how do you assess whether there's an addressable market which is large enough to build a business on, right? I think there are two parts to this. Number one, not every business needs to be a VC funded business. Okay, I think that's an important thing that a lot of people don't understand. You can build a business which is very valuable, generates a lot of cash without having a $1 billion market. Okay, we believe because the media tells us so, and popular media tells us that markets have to be worth many billions of dollars for it to be really attractive, and then VCs will fund you and then become really valuable. But you can identify a market which you have strength in, which you see as an insight of the problem, which is cash generating, and where you can build a very successful business on. And I want to put in the people who are listening to this in their head that there is another option of building business other than taking VC capital. Okay? Not every business needs to be function that way. If you do end up going down the road of saying, I want to build a business that is addressing a much larger market, growing much faster, and hence needs venture capital, I think it's important to identify how large that market is. We did a couple of things that maybe I can share that as an examples. There's something commonly called a MVP or a minimum viable product, right? You basically build something which has the minimum or the least amount of viability for you to test it out. It is not the most refined product. It is not what you are going to sell and invest millions of dollars to market, but it allows you to identify whether there are enough users and hopefully enough paying users who are willing to take up that product and able to identify the market size. In the case of Chalo, our first proposition was to allow people to identify at what time their city bus would arrive, right? Depending on where you're logging in from, that meant a DTC bus, a Best bus, a BMTC bus, when it would arrive. We took a very small micro market called Navi Mumbai, and we worked with about 100, 150 conductors to be able to create that minimum viable product and allow people to know when the bus would arrive. Just based on the feedback that we receive from users, the number of people who are opening our app, checking this information, gave us a very powerful user insight into the market, addressable market, and the user proposition for what we were building. We were able to further vet this through surveys, etc. But it can start that small, right? With very little investment to be able to validate the thesis that you have.
Those are great points. I think you've shared a couple of different things here about how inspiration can strike from different fields and subjects. It doesn't necessarily need to connect with what you have been working at, but I think the crux of what you have shared is that it's very critical to test out your idea using a minimum viable product or MVP, which helps you do small tests and experiments. Even at Pivot ourselves, we have done something similar when we first started, right? Like we are doing something different, which is not really been done on a large scale in India, which is helping people change their career paths, right? Not a lot of companies that are just solely focused on that. And for us, the MVP was literally just a landing page of our website initially, the first MVP, to assess whether people were going to sign up for a potential product like this, right? If there was even any interest, before we figured out how to solve that problem. So I think that makes a lot of sense. The other part which I really like, Nikhil, that you have touched upon is not every business needs to be a VC funded business, right? What I think you're trying to say there is that it doesn't necessarily need to be $1 billion idea every single time, right? It can be something that solves a niche problem for a smaller community of people. And that's also okay. It can be a lifestyle business as well. But the next and related question to this that I wanted to ask from you is, we have talked about building the MVP, doing some early experiments and testing it out, whether it works or not, whether people are liking or not. So let's say, you have launched something. Let's say, you're talking about the 100, 150 bus conductors that you were testing this out with. Now, let's say the initial feedback is horrible on your solution, right? You have understood the problem, but you have not been able to actually crack the exact solution, right? So how do you go about it, especially when you have limited resources, limited team members, capital to deploy on your product? How do you kind of quickly figure out how to get to an actual workable solution so as to optimize the MVP and get to a better product market fit, I guess?
Sure. I think that there is no, I don't think there's any one great path to it. Okay, I think there are different paths. I think it's more important that you look at the strength that you have, the capabilities that you have, and you pursue a path down that. I'll give a few examples of what I mean by that. Let's say you're a computer science engineer, and hence you have a pool of friends or colleagues who are also computer science engineers and can help you develop a solution, right? Get them together, maybe potentially make them co-founders, give them some sweat equity, pay them some additional money to help you for a few hours a day to be able to build that solution at very low cost. But that's something that's possible if you have a set of colleagues or friends who can help you down that path. If your strength is that you've worked in a company for 10 years and hence you have a bunch of colleagues who would probably invest with you or trust you to build something else, go raise a small friends and family round that gives you capital and the required resources to be able to do this. Number three could be if you feel that none of this is possible, but there is another co-founder, someone who is looking to build in a similar space, who you meet at an industry event or at a startup event. Collaborate with that person, understanding that they bring something different to the table, you bring something different to the table, and can make it happen. So there is no one way, which is a good thing, right? Because everyone can play it differently based on where their relative strengths lie. At Chalo, for example, we needed capital, and I was able to raise capital from people that I had worked with in the past to give us the capital to hire a basic team and be able to then put our product into shape. At Grip, we had certain different strengths and capabilities that were available to us. So I would request everyone to look inwards, identify that for themselves, and then go out and do it. There are money is just one form of being able to compensate someone for doing it. There is relationship, there are stock, all of those options are available, and you should pursue them to be able to achieve this.
Got it. Yeah, I think those are all great insights because, like you said, there's no one size fits all strategy, right? I think you really have to assess what your own financial bandwidth is, what kind of resources the startup actually requires to build that successful MVP. And also some creative ways, right, that you pointed out, like, for example, just teaming up with your friends or people in your network by giving them sweat equity, which may not necessarily require a huge amount of upfront capital. And things like those. So yeah, I think all great insights there. Just switching gears a little bit, right? Like we have talked about how to, get an inspiration for an idea and then how to test it out at early stage to see if there is any potential for an addressable market. Now, if we take it to the next level, things always get tricky when you are trying to acquire customers and really start your early traction in terms of generating revenues, right? I think I've heard from most entrepreneurs and investors that you can get a lot of people to be using your product, but until and unless you actually see some metrics like engagement or retention or revenues on your product, you can't really call it, an addressable market or a scalable product, right? So customers are the bloodline, the lifeline of a startup. And going from 0 to 100 customers or 100 to 1,000 or 1,000 to 10,000, all of those, in my understanding, require different strategies, right? So again, when you are starting out, you've built out an MVP, you have come up with a solution perhaps that has somewhat clicked with your target audience. Now, how do you take things to the next level in terms of generating actual ongoing revenues? What are some of the things that you did, particularly at Grip and Chalo, that help you, scale to that next level?
Got it. So let's assume for a minute that you have tested your MVP. You've got back reactions which say that this is a problem statement that is worth solving, and you've identified there's a large market, right? And the question you're asking is, how do you go from that initial set of users to a larger set of users and also to making money, right?
Right.
I'm assuming for a minute that since you have a minimal, you have an MVP and you have your initial product out, those users are re-engaging with you, right? Because if the users are not re-engaging with you or not opening your app again or not using your service again, the reality is that you don't have a business, okay? And revenue or more users are not going to come by. Okay? After a period of time, you have to look back at what you're not doing right, what your solution is not offering correctly, to be able to do it. So rather than focus on growth, if your initial 100,000, right, really small user numbers are not re-engaging, you need to not focus on growth, but you need to focus on fixing what is the problem that your initial users are facing. You need to take a hard call on saying whether this business is working or not working, right? Do not be focused on, it's like throwing more money into a fire and burning it away than re-looking to solve the problem. Okay, so the first thing to do is to make sure that you fix that, you address that. Let's assume for a minute that it's scenario B and it's a good scenario where they are actually engaging and you're seeing now a path to growth. Depending on the nature of business you are, whether it's B2B, B2C, whatever, please calibrate what I'm saying. But there are certain key things that always work, even in the absence of money. The most important one is customer referral. Right? If you can get a person who is engaging on your platform to refer to other people, you have the best and cheapest source of customer acquisition. There is no replacement for that. That's how we started marketing at Grip with almost no capital. We entirely built the first leg of the business on customer referrals. And that, to me, enabling that, right? And some of it will happen completely organically, but what you can do to nudge it is probably the best thing from your perspective. There are a couple of other smaller hacks. For example, go and get some PR. Get some press coverage on what you're delivering as a platform. The press today across platforms is very happy to cover startup stories, especially if you're doing something different. It doesn't matter what scale you are, but go and speak to a news reporter, go and make your the fact about your company available, and get some publicity for it, which can again be very helpful for user growth. If you do happen to be having capital to grow, there are definitely multiple avenues in which you can attract users through marketing. The only word of caution is to make sure you identify the correct channel for your user persona. Please don't go spend money on Facebook if your user persona is not on Facebook, right? If you're just simply, I mean, between Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, and Google and LinkedIn, each one of these platforms caters to a different audience. If you are selling something to millennials or to Gen Z, you probably can go and sell it on an Instagram. But if you're selling to millennials, you can probably do it on Facebook. If you're selling something which is appealing more to a professional audience, come to LinkedIn, right? And if it is something that you want to discover through search, go to Google. So you need to think about the right platform on which you can spend that money. I think the final question you had was how do you achieve revenue? Okay.
Right.
Honestly, if you are seeing engagement, you should start building out or charging your users in some form or the other. Once again, different use cases will have different things. It could be advertising, it could be a subscription fee, it could be a one-time fee. You have to look at what is right for your business. I think it's difficult for me to generalize that answer. But if your users are engaging, majority of them will also be happy to pay, right? And you can start testing out with smaller amounts, building to larger amounts, different strategies. You can even do something called an A/B test, which is where you charge some of your users money and you don't charge some users money and see how their performance varies on the platform. But the key to investing money or effort in growth or the path to revenue first comes with seeing engagement of the users, repeat engagement of the user on the platform, and seeing trends like referrals, which will happen organically from users. And Arjun, I think that's what you were saying in the first place, that achieving those engagement metrics is the most critical to success.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, because building a startup is kind of a combination of art and science, right? A lot of the things that you're talking about, people have a hard time assessing when is the right time to, let's say, start focusing more on the harder metrics like your number of users as well as revenues or GTV for a e-commerce platform, as opposed to just focusing on your initial metrics like engagement and retention. One of the things that you highlighted early on in this point was that most businesses could really do better and achieve more growth by just focusing on user referrals, right? And that's a great point because it's a very low cost investment. Each of your user is kind of becoming your brand ambassador and driving in more traction and more users. So you had mentioned it at a high level, but it would be great to do a little bit of a deeper dive in this, Nikhil, perhaps if possible, as to, like you said, you can nudge your users. Some of the referrals may come organically, but you can also nudge your users to provide more referrals. Any one or two strategies that you have seen work well from a customer referral standpoint?
Yeah, I think the most common strategy used across platforms is to give a referral incentive, which is to tell a user that if they refer someone, then both the referee and the referrer, right? Both people who refers and the person receiving the referral receive some kind of compensation, and it's very nominal, right? It can be anywhere between 100 rupees to 1,000 rupees as compensation for bringing a new paying customer onto the platform. Even that smaller nudge can allow this to grow quite sizably. And this is not just our experience, but experience across industries that it works very well. Obviously, the best referral is one that is unpaid, right? And if you have a product that is creating unpaid referrals in large quantities, you are really onto something.
Got it. Yeah. Okay. Got it. Very helpful. One of the questions that we have here from Ashni is something related to the topic that we are talking about. So is it okay if I just bring it up right now, Nikhil?
Sure.
Yeah. So I think Ashni is asking, if a company is doing performance marketing, or if the company believes strongly that performance marketing would be a good source of traffic, um, how long is it important to kind of spend on visibility and driving that organic traffic as opposed to focusing on the conversions and ROI and driving revenues, right? I mean, the question is a little bit granular, I would say, but it's a very critical one in my mind. And kind of what I was alluding to earlier, which is that, building a startup is combination of art and science. There's no clear milestone which tells you, okay, now you can start focusing less on just driving traffic, but conversions and ROI. So yeah, I think it kind of goes back to some of what you have already shared, but any specific points that you feel could help address this question that Ashni has?
Sure. Maybe just some general thoughts on it, right? Number one, SEO is something that takes a much longer period of time to show results, right? And hence, it is important, depending on the capital you have, depending on the growth that you are seeing, to invest in performance marketing early in the business to get that momentum going. SEO is equally important to start on day one, but it will take time to give you results. This includes how you think about creating content organically around the proposition that you're having.
Mm-hmm.
I think all of us would like to ultimately see a business that is only about SEO, right? It is the lowest cost of customer acquisition as compared to performance marketing. But I think the reality is that for most businesses, and especially if you want to build faster, right, where you're investing money to have higher growth rate, performance marketing and SEO will both go hand in hand for a very, very long period of time. Okay? There is clear evidence that performance marketing will also boost organic discovery. Okay, it does work in that way, and hence, I don't think it's possible for you to think about closing performance marketing, but I think it is possible at a later point of time in your business cycle to reduce performance marketing as compared to what you're seeing on the organic discovery through SEO. Please, lots of caveats. This is really dependent on the business you're building, the industry you're building, the access to capital you have, the quality of team you have. One of the biggest mistakes that I have seen in performance marketing is to just spend money on performance marketing without putting the right performance marketing strategies in place, without thinking of the right content in place, or without your product being mature enough to receive that kind of investment in marketing, right? Performance marketing is not a simple term. Ads on Google are not a simple term. There are many nuances to making performance marketing successful, and there is an importance to be prepared as a business to have the right person running it, right amount of money running it, and right product to receive that performance marketing.
Got it. Yeah, for everybody, who knows about performance marketing, great. In case you're wondering what all performance marketing might include, I think it's, and correct me if I'm wrong, Nikhil, but it basically includes, I would say, paid ads on Google, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and other platforms primarily to drive very specific metrics for your business. Typically, it's to generate more traction for your website or revenues. So this is clearly a different kind of a customer acquisition strategy compared to some of the other things that Nikhil has shared so far, like user referrals or doing just organic SEO and things like those. So I think based on what Nikhil has shared, it's very important to have a clear performance marketing strategy in place to know which channels your audience is currently on, whether it's Google, whether it's Facebook or something else, before you actually start spending the money on ads to drive more traffic and revenue. So makes a lot of sense. Nikhil, one of the things you mentioned, just briefly you touched upon, is like having the right team in place, right? And I mean, again, I can't emphasize enough how important it is to have the right people to partner with at an early stage, especially when you're just starting out in your business. So you had shared one or two strategies with regard to partnering with your friends or people in your network, but not everybody we have come across has the right kind of network to partner with people to start their startup in the beginning, right? So it might be easier if you're somebody who has already gotten experience in the tech field, right? If you've already worked at a startup, there's a good chance you have a decent network, right? Of let's say engineers, designers, growth marketers, etc. But a lot of the people who join Pivot, who come to us, are from a non-traditional background. So they are not necessarily from tech background, right? I myself am a non-tech entrepreneur. I haven't had any background in tech, right? So for these specific aspiring entrepreneurs, what are some of the best ways in your mind to kind of, get early team members who complement your skill set, who believe in your vision, and can actually help you build a full-fledged business at a rapid pace?
Yeah, Arjun, probably the most difficult question, and also the most difficult thing to do as a founder. And it doesn't matter whether you're a tech founder or a non-tech founder. Finding and building that initial team is incredibly hard. Okay? From a and I'm assuming that's a good quality team. It's incredibly hard. If you're a tech founder, finding a business co-founder is very challenging, and vice versa, right? I am a non-tech founder, and it is difficult to find someone who is a tech founder, right? No question about it. Or even forget a founder, but just a great CTO or great chief product officer to join you. I think a couple of things that, and actually you said it, is that people have to buy into your vision and be excited about what you're building, and then want to join you, because often they will have to take salary cuts, take a fair risk on their employment to be able to join an early stage startup. One of the things that worked for us really well is to post and create a perception around Grip on LinkedIn, right? So simple stuff, just talking about what we're doing, what is the nature of the market that we are aiming to disrupt, how large our vision is, what are some of the values of the company that we're trying to build, what is the culture that we try to engage, what is the kind of people that we're trying to look for. And some of the best hires that we have made have come to us via replying to us on LinkedIn, or referrals for people who have used our product and said, oh, I really like using your product. How can I be part of the company? And that is something that has allowed us to hire people who we never knew in our network, but just came to us by discovering our business. So in whatever forum or place you can get an opportunity to talk about yourself, your background as a founder, and the vision that you're building, you'll hopefully find common minds and people who want to be associated with it. If you don't have that, please go reach out to your existing circle and ask people to refer other friends or colleagues that they have, and make it like a spider network to try to get some of those leads. But it's not easy, and it's not necessarily something that you can do on Naukri.com. Right? I don't think that's a very easy search to do. I think it's a tough one. It takes time, and investing early, even before you've started, in identifying that co-founder, preferably someone who has a very different set of skills, is one of the best things that you can do for your business.
Right. So yeah, I mean, there are two kinds of teammates that we are generally thinking of when we are building a startup at an early stage. One is, like you said, co-founders, right? So typically people who would have a large amount of ownership stake in the company, similar to the main founder. But then there are also different ways to get employees on board who may not necessarily be co-founders, but they might require higher cash compensation as an employee, plus equity as well. So you've obviously already emphasized the importance of having a co-founder level person for business, marketing, and tech requirements, right? Which are the three most important drivers for a startup. So in case, let's say, today I know the tech market is really hot. There are a lot of tech employees who are working directly with companies in US and getting much more lucrative opportunities than they might get in India today. Is there any creative strategy or any creative way that you have been able to kind of quickly hire tech talent, either as co-founders or as just employees, or even freelancers or something else, that have helped solve your tech requirements without really waiting to get a very capable co-founder on board?
I think the only thing that has worked for us till today is to be to get people who are currently working in companies to give us some time and work alongside us on weekends, or a couple of hours after their day jobs are over as consultants to the company. And a lot of times what we have seen happen is that as they work with us, they get excited about what we are doing, and then end up actually leaving their jobs and joining us full time. Okay?
Wow.
So there is the hurdle to become a consultant is very, very low, right? Because it's a little bit of extra income, it's a little bit of extra work, it's being part of a different company. And once they get excited by what you're building and the kind of people you have, it becomes easier for them to think about doing it full time. So that probably is the only strategy that has worked. It's not a quick strategy, because they're going to work with you for a few months before they take a decision, but it definitely is something that we have seen work for us.
Okay. Got it. Yeah, I think that's a pretty nifty way of kind of saving time to get started right away without, really fully convincing a person. And it's a de-risk way for both the business as well as the consultant to kind of try things out, have a probationary sort of a period, right, before they commit full time. That's great. Just out of curiosity, like, have you been actually able to hire some of your core team members and co-founders in this manner, like the way you described?
I would not say co-founders, because at least in the Grips case, I've known my co-founders for many years before. But yes, we're able to hire several people in teams through this strategy, several senior people.
Got it. Very interesting. So I hope that was something that people made a note of, because I feel like not everybody thinks about it in that way when they are trying to partner with early team members. The next thing that I quickly want to touch upon before we start taking more questions, and actually this is one of the questions already asked by one of the members here, Anirudh, is again, you have touched upon this, but would be good to do a deeper dive, is how do you fund your business at an early stage when you don't really have other investors, be it like, let's say, VC or maybe angels? What are some of the key options that one can avail today to just launch something off the ground at the beginning, especially if you don't have investors or you don't have a lot of internal capital or personal savings?
Yeah. I think you have to understand that at that stage of time, the only thing that people are betting on is you as a founder, right? They have nothing else to bet on to make that investment. The only people who will bet on you is people who you know very well, right? Either your friends or your family or colleagues. And hence, at that early stage, the best way, and it's a fairly common way, is to raise money from friends and family in return for equity in your company, right? A lot of the largest companies and most famous companies have done this, but that is unfortunately a very limited option that you have, and that's something that you should exercise. Obviously, you need to make sure your friends and family understand that this is capital that they can completely lose, right? And it may not work out. You need to understand that you are taking capital from someone who may be your father, maybe your uncle, maybe an aunt, maybe a very close friend, and uh, doing this may impact your relationship with them if you're not able to return that capital. Right. So do it with sufficient amount of caution and awareness that you need to provide them about what they're getting into. But at a stage where you don't have VC money, you don't have angel investors, you don't have your own capital, but you require money, this is probably the one of the only ways to raise the capital.
Got it. Okay. One thing I just wanted to understand is, there are a couple of, I don't know, Nikhil, if you have actually come across these, but there are a couple of crowdfunding platforms out there today, right? I'm not even 100% sure around the legality of it, but basically crowdfunding is where you use, a third-party platform to announce that you are building something new as a startup. You share your vision and some of the key specifics about your product, your solution, and there are other, I would say, unknown investors out there who have joined that platform to invest in lucrative opportunities that will give them good return on their investments. So it's basically like raising money from strangers, right, who you don't really know. Is that something that you have come across, especially for the Indian startup ecosystem, or do you feel like if you haven't, there is scope for something like that in the future, and can early stage entrepreneurs avail that kind of a financing option?
Yeah, there are many crowdsourcing platforms, and I think it's a great opportunity that exists for raising capital. I do think that on those platforms, to be able to access capital, you need to be slightly deeper in your business. You need to have some more maturity in your business to be able to access those platforms. Because once again, those individuals don't know you. Right? And hence, if you need to convince them to invest in your business, you need to be able to show an MVP, some user traction, and then they will go and invest. I'm not saying it's not possible on day zero, but the chances or the probability of success of raising capital on such platforms is very low until you have been able to show some traction. It's something I would encourage all of you to try, but just keep in mind what stage you reach out to these platforms at to be able to have a higher chance of success.
Got it. Okay, I think the main point there is to assess what's the right stage at which you avail this kind of a crowdfunding option, because your business needs to be at a certain maturity level to be able to convince potential investors.
And the reason I say that is there are many companies who raise money on crowdsourcing platforms. Grips raised money on crowdsourcing platforms, and hence the investor on the platform has a wide variety of options.
Mm-hmm.
Sees the ability to invest in a more mature company versus investing on a day zero of a company, he's quite likely to go and invest in a mature company. Right? These platforms are not only for companies that are just starting off, and hence the more traction you have, the more data you can show, the higher the chance of your success.
Got it. Very helpful. I want to take another question here that we have, and it's a slightly different one compared to whatever we have been focusing on so far. So I like it. Anirudh is asking, what are some of the best sources to learn how to start up, especially for people who have limited experience, and starting something up on their own? And anything like any specific learning avenues that Nikhil may have helped you when you were starting your first startup or even your second startup, be it books, courses, or any other platforms?
I have a very different view on this from what a lot of people may think, and please feel free to not listen to me on this one. I actually believe that no book can help you doing a startup. I don't think any particular author or founder can document his journey as a startup, as a founder, and you can significantly take learnings from it. Because the context of what they built, when they built it, their relative strengths and weaknesses is going to be fundamentally different from yours.
Mm-hmm.
I read a lot of these books. I read a lot of autobiographies of founders. And I think you can only take certain limited insights from that journey that you believe can be relevant to you. But if there was a book which says startup 101, and this is how you must start up, do A, B, C, D, please do not read such a book. Okay, that's my strong advice, because it does not ever apply to your particular situation. Everyone's situation is individual, right? Mm-hmm. Where you are in life, what family you have, what financial responsibilities you have, cannot be replicated for anyone else in the world. Right? So there are some great books out there. Personally, if you read the books of other founders who talk about their journeys, I think there are lots of insights to be taken. I think it's important to read those books at different points of time in your startup journey, not just when you start, but actually what has been incredibly helpful is to read those books over my journey, because I'm able to relate much more to those experiences, able to learn from them and then apply them. But there's no curriculum on starting up, right? The best thing that you can do if you want to learn how to start up is go join an early stage startup. Not as a co-founder, but just go become the first 5, become the first 10-member employee of a startup. Living that day to day for a couple of years is going to be the best learning that you can get.
Got it. Yeah, I think that, what you were saying kind of reminded me of something I had read in this book, which is, it was recommended to me by people as sort of the Bible of startups. It was written by Steve Blank. I don't know if you've come across this one. It's called Startup Owner's Manual. And Steve Blank is very well known personality in the world of startups. Some people call him father of startups because he built the whole so-called curriculum which you're talking about around like lean startup principles and all of those things. One of the things which is core to what he espouses to other folks is when you are building a startup or building a product, the first and most important thing is to get out of the building and go out, meet other people, and nothing will really happen if you just sit inside your building, right? The main essence of that is that you need to talk to other people. Now, when COVID happened, right, 2 years ago, and people could not physically leave their buildings or their apartments, obviously this, if it was taken too literally as an advice from Steve Blank, it would serve as a big hindrance, right? Because people cannot easily meet other folks. But at the same time, we saw, I would say, the most phenomenal growth in number of startups during COVID era as well, right? So obviously there are some novel approaches that people took to, kind of build their early stage startups. So I think context, like you said, is so important, and it will really vary depending on what your situation is. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
I think what I said earlier, inspiration can come from anywhere. Meeting people and getting the thoughts will give you one form of inspiration. But sitting at home and getting frustrated and discovering a different problem statement is a different form of inspiration. Each of us will probably get 1,000 startup ideas every day right in front of our face, but we just don't pick up on it. Okay?
Yeah.
I mean, the idea to start food delivery is not rocket science, right? But all of us used to call restaurants to order food. I don't. Maybe many of you are very young and have never called a restaurant to order food, but I definitely have, right? And it used to be a frustrating experience because menu was not available. You would say something on the phone, he would understand half of it. Then he would come. Then you would pay cash. You have no idea where the delivery guy is. We all struggle through it, but I myself failed to see that that's something that can be solved, and didn't build a business until someone like Swiggy came along and said, okay, let's build a business out of this. So inspiration for business ideas is staring, and we all eat food, right? We could all be inspired to make Swiggy instead of the current founders, and we need to just constantly just look for that insight and apply it to our skill sets.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Another question that we have here, Nikhil, is from Avinash, and basically he just wants us to do a slightly more deeper dive on building an MVP and testing the viability. I think you gave some great examples about your own startup, especially Chalo, on how you had done the early testing with your MVP. Are there any other kind of MVPs that you have seen perhaps for other businesses which have done tremendously well? Again, perhaps where people can start by investing very limited amount of time and capital to get that quick validation you need for the potential in your idea.
Yeah. I think one of the most famous startups in the world is Airbnb. And I think their MVP, which I read in their story, was that there was a conference that was getting organized in a particular city in the US. And they felt that there will be lesser number of hotel rooms available. So a lot of people may want to look at alternative forms of, staying the night. They purchased something called air beds, which is basically an inflatable bed, and they basically put it up in either their house or a bunch of houses, and offered people to sleep on that air bed. Okay. Which is also why it's called Airbnb. But that was an incredibly low cost MVP product, right? They didn't even buy a bed. They bought an air bed and put it up, and that was the only thing they offered. just an airbed and maybe a blanket, right? Nothing else. And they saw a massive surge in the number of people who took up that service and spent the night on that airbed. That is probably a great example of an MVP with very, very little cost.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that is a really good example. And I think it's also about kind of, being observant and alert enough to know like what might be a great opportunity for your specific idea. Airbnb could have just done this in a, non-conference kind of an environment just to try it out and see what happened. But I think given the fact that so many people were traveling from outside specifically for this conference, obviously it really aligned well with what the problem that they were focused on solving. And I think just again contextualizing your solution with the highest requirement to solve that particular problem statement is probably very, very essential. The other one, I don't know if you have come across, and this is something which I to date see people using as an MVP idea very often, is the one done by Zappos founder in US. And Zappos, I don't know if everybody will know, was one of the first basically online shoe e-commerce, like footwear e-commerce company. And it got acquired by Amazon for about over $1 billion. And the way it started was fairly, I would say, creative in that the founder, Tony Heish, he basically did not want to actually build a product. He just wanted to see whether there was merit in his idea without really building a product. So what he did was just build a website which showcased certain shoes that he pretended that he was selling, right? So he didn't really have the inventory of these shoes in-house. And he just showcased, I think, about 50 different shoe pairs on a website to see whether people would actually purchase a shoe online, because up till that date, there was no other online company that was selling shoes, because people felt like you have to try out a shoe before you buy it, right? That was the reigning kind of hypothesis. So to validate that, his own hypothesis that people will buy shoes online, he built this website and he started to see orders trickling in. And when he got orders, he literally went to the, the Nike store and Reebok stores and purchased the shoes there and then used a shipping company to actually ship the product out, right? So he hasn't really invested in-house in anything except just putting some pictures of shoes online. And these pictures were also taken at these, stores of Nike and Reebok. So I think, there are a lot of alternative ways of building something where you don't have to invest a lot in the beginning. Airbnb is a great example. And I would say like Zappos is another one that I have come across. So yeah, I think great insight there.
Yeah.
One last question, perhaps, Nikhil, and then we'll start wrapping this up. But again, Anirudh has this question that if you are not a subject matter expert in what you are starting, right? I mean, again, like for example, most innovative ideas that haven't been done before, like in Uber and Airbnb, Amazon, right? Obviously, people are not subject matter experts when they're starting out because they are building something that is revolutionary, that is new. It doesn't really have a parallel. So how do you actually approach building a startup where you have so much uncertainty and lack of clarity on the subject that you're dealing with? How do you equip yourself with knowledge to build something in a more informed way?
I actually think it's great that you don't understand the space you're building in. Okay, I think it's been one of the, in my personal opinion, when we got into mobility at Chalo, none of us came from a mobility background, right? We had no idea how buses operate, which also meant we were not jaded by what could go wrong, okay, or how the industry, what is the fault lines of the industry. Same way, we don't come from a investment, from a wealth management background while building Grip, and hence we are here to be able to question and rewrite the rules of the game. Okay? Travis built Uber without knowing how to run cabs. The Airbnb folks did not necessarily come from a hospitality industry. So I think the ability to you don't need to be a subject matter expert. I think you need to understand the problem statement. You need to identify what your user really wants, and then you need to go and build it. Right? I think understanding the user's perspective is the most important thing that you can do, rather than understand the industry. Engage with users as much as possible, understand their problem statement. Over a period of time, the industry will change to what you need or what your users need to actually be, and that's what startup disruption is about. So one of the things I love best is that if you don't come from the industry and build it, you're going to question everything around it. I don't think it's a criteria to start up in a particular industry. Yeah, please apply this logic to medical science. I think that's a different ball game altogether. But even in medical science, if you think about creating a platform like a Practo or something else which allows discovery of doctors to happen better, is not actually the science of medicine. You can be from any profession, but it's as a patient, you've had this problem of how to discover doctors, and you can build a business around it. So feel free to challenge all those assumptions getting into a sector.
Objective, unbiased mindset and perspective about it. Anything can really help you think outside the box, which is so critical for any startup that wants to build a good moat around their product, right? Rather than just copycatting another idea that already exists. Yeah, no, makes a lot of sense. So thanks so much, Nikhil. I think that was a really great session. I think your knowledge, experience, and skills that you have shared with us today in building the two startups hopefully will help a lot of other people who are thinking about starting something of their own. Anything that you want to share as like parting thoughts, like any key points you would like aspiring entrepreneurs or early stage entrepreneurs to focus on when they are starting out?
Sure. First of all, thanks for having me on, and I think it's a privilege to be a founder. It really is, because you have the opportunity to create something out of thin air, and hopefully influence the life of millions of people. For a lot of people, and I put myself in the same bucket. I think it's about leaving and building an institution that outlasts any of us. Right? The idea is to not create something that is here for the next 1 year, 2 year, 10 years, but is really build something that's going to be there for the next 100 years. And that kind of impact can only be delivered as a founder. So I think it's a privilege to be able to build something of value. My last piece of advice would be, before you get into this, please think about all the questions that have come is around the professional aspect of a startup, but there is a huge personal aspect to a startup. Please keep in mind where you are financially, where you are from a personal perspective. If you're married, how does your wife or your husband think about this? If you have kids, what are the responsibilities towards them? Are they committed to what you're going to get into, where you're going to constantly and obsessively think about this venture rather than what about your family responsibilities? Okay. What is the balance that you can draw between personal and professional life when you get into a startup? Will you be able to continue to financially support your family? For the next 3 or 4 years of a startup, please assume that you will not make money. You will probably not have a meaningful salary. And at the end of 3 or 4 years, the probability of failure is very, very high. Being aware of that, and I don't mean this in a way to discourage you, but if you are able to think about this and choose the time of starting up, your chances of success are going to be higher, right? So please keep the personal element of the decision very, very high up before you decide to start. That's my last. Yeah.
Brilliant, and thanks so much for bringing that up. We did focus on the professional elements, and I think it's almost equally, if not even more important, to give a lot of weightage to the personal elements of your life. So it makes a lot of sense, and especially from a relationship and health standpoint, I think it does require a lot of personal introspection before you start something like this. So thanks so much again, Nikhil, for joining us, and for the whole audience who were there throughout this session today. Thanks again for taking time out on this Saturday afternoon to be with us. Just to kind of close this, I want to reiterate that at Pivot, we do help people transition to new fields, new roles, including starting your own startup. So we will be able to connect you with experts similar to Nikhil, who have a lot of experience starting their own startups in different functions as a marketer, engineer, designer, etc. So feel free to check us out and feel free to reach out to Nikhil in case you have any questions about building something of your own. Nikhil, is it okay if we share your LinkedIn profile in case people want to just reach out to you?
Yeah, no worries at all. Right.
Great. Thanks again, Nikhil, so much. And guys, feel free to please check out our platform. It's called www.mypivot.work. And I hope you all have a great rest of the day. Thanks again.
Thanks so much, Arjun. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.